I want you to just close your eyes for a second.
Okay.
Imagine you're sitting on this really beautiful, sun-drenched terrace in Switzerland.
Sounds pretty nice.
It's the Bernese Oberland. The air is super crisp. And maybe you've got a cold beer, a hot chocolate right in front of you.
Oh, definitely a beer.
Right, a cold beer. And you could hear these cowbells sort of clanging gently out in the meadows. It is just the absolute picture of a safe, idyllic European holiday.
Just everything is green and gold and civilized.
Exactly, civilized. But then you tilt your head back.
Yeah.
And you look up.
Yeah.
And directly above this whole scene of total comfort, just completely blotting out the sun, is a wall.
A massive wall.
A wall of rock and ice that rises, it's 6,000 feet straight up into the stratosphere.
It's just immense.
It's literally a vertical freezer.
Yeah.
It's this place of constant avalanches and stonefall and storms that practically create their own weather systems up there. And if you had a telescope...
Which a lot of the tourists down on that terrace actually do.
Right, they have these telescopes set up. If you look through one, you might see these tiny little black dots moving on the wall.
Men fighting for their lives.
Exactly. Men just absolutely fighting for survival.
And that juxtaposition is really what defines the Eiger, doesn't it? It's not some remote peak in the Himalayas where you suffer in private.
It's a spectacle.
It's a stage. It's the North Face, the Nordwand, or as the headlines in the 1930s really loved to call it, and how it kind of entered the cultural consciousness.
The Mordwand.
The Mordwands, right. The murder roll.
And that isn't just some cheap tabloid pun or a clever rhyme.
No, definitely not. By the time the story we're covering today really kicks off, that wall had become the most public, the most gruesome graveyard in all of European mountaineering.
Which brings us to our mission today. We are doing a deep dive into the psychology of that graveyard.
Yeah.
We're unpacking Heinrich Harrer's classic book, The White Spider, which is, it's widely considered the absolute Bible of mountaineering literature.
Oh, without a doubt.
But we aren't just here to recount a climbing trip. Our real goal here is to try and understand what the book calls the royal irrationality of voluntarily stepping into a meat grinder.
And we're looking at all this through a very specific lens today. We're obviously using the original 1938 account by Harrer, which goes into the first successful ascent.
Right.
But we're also layering on this really fascinating perspective from Joe Simpson.
The guy who wrote Touching the Void.
Exactly. He wrote the introduction to the modern edition of The White Spider. And Simpson is so crucial here because he essentially asks the question that the original climbers were too busy surviving to even ask.
Which is why.
Yeah. Why do we do this?
So let's actually start right there with Simpson's perspective, because he's a legend in his own right.
Yeah.
This is the guy who famously crawled out of a crevasse with a completely shattered leg in Peru.
Yeah, he knows a thing or two about survival.
But he talks about reading The White Spider when he was just 14 years old. And he says it terrified him.
Which is the rational response, honestly.
Completely the rational response. He actually says the book should have put him off mountaineering for life.
But it didn't.
It didn't. Instead, he gets obsessed. And he talks a lot about the language in the book. He calls it archaic. What does he mean by that exactly? Is he just saying it's old-fashioned?
It's a bit more than just the publication date. Simpson points out that modern climbing literature, and we see this all the time in magazines or YouTube vlogs today, it's usually very cool, very understated.
Like downplaying the danger.
Yeah, like very technical. A modern climber might write, "We had a bit of an epic up there," or "The crux was super sketchy."
Right. It plays it very cool.
Exactly. It downplays the drama. But Harrer's book, and really the whole German and Austrian climbing culture of the 30s, it's heavy. It is incredibly melodramatic.
Lots of big words.
Yeah, it's full of words like fate and destiny and battle and glory.
It sounds almost Wagnerian, like a grand opera.
Precisely. It's very Wagnerian. And Simpson admits that this style feels a bit repellent and disturbing to the modern ear.
Sure, because we're not used to that earnestness.
Right. But, and this is his key insight, he argues that this archaic, heavy style is actually the only way to accurately describe the Eiger of that era.
Because the reality matched the tone.
Exactly. If you used modern, cool language, you'd essentially be lying to the reader. The reality of the mountain was melodramatic.
It was literal life and death every second.
Yes. It was avalanches that literally sounded like artillery fire. It was bodies hanging on ropes for weeks, just swaying in the freezing wind.
You can't really describe a horror movie with a corporate memo.
That's a great way to put it. You need that gothic weight to convey what was actually happening.
And speaking of that horror movie vibe you mentioned, artillery fire, Simpson talks about this concept of the archives of fear.
Yeah.
As a kid, he was haunted by these specific images from the book, men pinned down, the horrifying sounds. But the thing that really stuck with him, and honestly with me when I was going through the source material, is this idea of the game of ghosts.
The clutter on the mountain.
Yes, the idea that the mountain is physically cluttered with the past.
It's such a chilling detail, because when you think about climbing Everest or K2, especially back in those early days, it was mostly pristine snow and rock.
Untouched nature.
Right. But on the Eiger, in the 30s and 40s, you were literally climbing past recent history. You'd be pulling yourself up and you'd find a shattered piton just hammered into a crack by a guy who died right there 2 years ago.
Or a frayed piece of rope.
A frayed rope end just flapping in the wind, a piece of a leather boot. You aren't just fighting the physical climb, you are physically encountering the evidence of the men who died trying to do exactly what you are doing.
It turns the mountain into a haunted house.
It really does. It makes the whole endeavor a psychological test just as much as a physical one. And Simpson talks about this nonsensical game of life.
What does he mean by that?
Well, he points out that climbing isn't really a sport.
Because there's no opposing team.
Right, and no referees. In sports, you have rules. If you get tackled hard in rugby or football, a whistle blows, and a medic runs right out onto the field.
Someone stops the game.
Exactly. On the Eiger, there are no rules. The only referee is gravity. And the penalty for a mistake is death.
That's a heavy concept to accept before you even tie the rope.
It is. But Simpson suggests that this death toll isn't a bug in the system, it's a feature. He says that death, in a paradoxical way, validates the life-affirming nature of the game.
Like if it were totally safe, it wouldn't mean anything.
If you couldn't die, it would just be a really intense gym workout. The fact that the stakes are ultimate is what gives the whole experience its profound weight.
Okay, so before we get into the actual climbers who face those ultimate stakes,
Yeah.
I think we need to understand the trap itself.
The geography.
Yeah, because the book is titled The White Spider. And honestly, that sounds like a metaphor, right? Like something out of a Tolkien novel. But it's a very real, very specific place high up on the mountain.
Geographically, it's the defining feature of the upper face.
Paint that picture for us. What are we looking at?
So I want you to imagine the north face again. It isn't just a flat vertical wall like the side of a building. It's concave. It's shaped like a massive, shallow amphitheater.
Okay, like a giant bowl turned sideways.
Exactly. And near the very top of this bowl, there is a permanent ice field. It consists of this central body of eternal snow and ice, and then it has these long, white cracks filled with ice radiating outward and downward into the rock gullies.
So it looks like legs.
Yes. From the telescopes down at the hotels, it looks exactly like a giant white spider just waiting to pounce.
Although Harrer writes that he actually really hates that name.
He does. He hates it.
He says he usually dislikes melodramatic names, and he really rejects this idea that the mountain is a spider's web catching climbers like helpless flies.
Right, because Harrer is a climber. He wants to believe in human agency. He hates the idea of climbers being just passive victims or insects. He wants to believe that skill and willpower actually matter.
But even he admits the name is geographically perfect.
He has to, because the physical reality of the spider is terrifying. And here is the technical takeaway for you listening, the sort of summary of why the geography is so lethal.
It's a funnel.
The spider is a massive funnel.
Let's unpack that, because that seems to be the
Yeah.
core of why it's so dangerous. It's not just that it's steep.
It's the placement. Think about the shape of the mountain again. The actual summit structure is directly above the spider.
Right.
So when the sun hits the top of the mountain, even on a relatively cold day, the ice holding the summit rocks together starts to melt just a tiny bit.
The glue comes undone.
Exactly. Rocks loosen, gravity takes over, and because the face is concave, everything that falls from the top stones the size of your fist, massive blocks of ice, full-blown avalanches, they
Yeah.
naturally follow the gullies and funnel directly down onto the spider.
So if you were climbing on the spider, you were essentially standing in the bottom of a giant garbage chute while the mountain is just actively throwing trash at you.
You are a sitting duck in a bowling alley. And what makes it worse is that because the spider is made of steep ice, you have to move very deliberately.
You can't just sprint across it.
You can't run. You are totally exposed for hours. Harrer actually says this specific section tests a person's character and common sense way more than just their athletic ability.
Because anyone can be athletic in a gym, but how do you react when a rock is whistling past your head?
Right. Athletic ability helps you pull hard on steep rock, But character is what helps you keep moving. When a rock just smashed your partner's shoulder, your hands are freezing, and you know another avalanche is coming in exactly 30 seconds.
It's psychological torture.
Completely.
All right, so that sets the stage. We have the murder wall, we have the ghosts of past climbers, and we have this terrifying literal trap high up on the face. Now, to really understand the triumph of 1938, we have to walk through the graveyard first.
We have to understand the tragedies that built the Eiger's legend.
And the tragedies on the Eiger, they are just peculiarly heartbreaking. They play out in this agonizing slow motion.
Let's start with 1935. Max Settelmeyer and Karl Maringer.
These are the first two guys to really give the North Face a serious go. They look up from the valley, they think they see a line, and they just go for it.
And almost right away, they walk directly into the Eiger's first major trap, which is the deception of scale.
This is such a crucial concept, especially if you're not a climber.
Yeah, it's hard to grasp. When you stand at the bottom of the Eiger at Kleinscheidegg, the air is incredibly clear, and the face is just so steep that a band of rock, say 3,000 feet up, looks like a tiny little step.
Something you could just hop right over.
It completely distorts your perception. In reality, that small step is a 300-foot overhanging limestone fortress.
Wow.
Settelmeyer and Maringer were fantastic climbers for their time, but they completely underestimated the scale of what they were looking at.
So they were too slow.
They climbed well for days, but they were much too slow. And on the Eiger, speed is your only real safety. If you are slow, you are exposed to the weather for much longer.
And the weather on the Eiger, as we said, is its own terrifying ecosystem.
It is. And a storm hit them. A massive front rolled in. They were trapped high on the face at a spot that is now known forever in climbing history as the Death Bivouac.
Now, the word bivouac normally just means a temporary camp, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like sleeping under the stars on a ledge.
Usually, yes. But in this context on the Eiger, it means sitting on an icy sloping ledge, roughly the width of a paperback book tied to a single rock spike, while a literal hurricane blasts you with freezing sleet at minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit.
And they had no modern gear.
No tents, no sleeping bags warm enough for those conditions, just wool and tweed. They literally froze to death at 10,800 feet.
And the true horror of this, and this goes back to that gladiator aspect Simpson talked about, is that the tourists down at the telescopes watched it happen.
They could literally see them dying.
They were just visible, but they might as well have been on the dark side of the moon for all the help anyone could give them.
It's the ultimate reality TV show, but the stakes are fatal.
It's so morbid. But as tragic as 1935 was, it's really the 1936 attempt that defines the absolute horror of the Eiger.
Yes. If you take nothing else away from the history of mountaineering, you have to understand the story of Tony Kurtz.
This is the story that honestly just haunts me.
Yeah.
It is the defining tragedy of the mountain.
It really is the perfect storm.
Yeah.
It's ambition, technical brilliance, a tiny, minuscule error, and then just agonizing bad luck.
So set the scene for us. Who exactly was on the mountain in 1936?
You had two separate teams that eventually joined up on the wall. There were two Bavarians, Andreas Hinterstoicer and Tony Kurtz.
Okay.
Hinterstoicer was an absolute powerhouse. He was a soldier, incredibly strong, bold. Kurtz was more of a quiet, highly professional mountain guide, very precise.
And the other team?
Two Austrians, Willy Angerer and Edie Rayner. They were young, they were incredibly strong, and very, very ambitious.
And they actually started off incredibly well. In fact, Hinterstoicer solved one of the biggest, most famous problems on the lower face right out of the gate.
He did. There's this section of sheer, smooth rock that up until then seemed completely impassable.
It's like a blank wall.
It's a slab of limestone with absolutely no handholds and no footholds. To the left, there's a field of ice that leads up higher. But between the climbers and that ice is this smooth, vertical gray wall.
So how do you cross something with nothing to hold on to?
Well, Hinterstoicer managed to cross it using a technique called a tension traverse.
We really need to break this down technically, because this specific move becomes the hinge of the entire disaster later on. What exactly is a tension traverse?
Okay, so picture a smooth, vertical wall in front of you. It's glassy, you can't climb across it normally. So Hinterstoicer pounds a piton, which is a metal spike, into a crack in the rock right where he's standing.
He hammers it in.
Right. Then he clips his climbing rope through a carabiner attached to that spike.
Okay.
Then he leans backward out over the abyss, putting all of his body weight onto the rope. This creates massive friction between the soles of his boots and the smooth rock.
Oh, I see. So the rope is holding him into the wall.
Exactly. He leans back and he basically runs sideways across the wall, like a pendulum swinging on a clock.
He swings across the abyss. That is terrifying.
It is, but it works. The tension holds him. He swings far enough across that he can finally grab the good ice on the other side.
It's a brilliant move.
A stroke of absolute genius for the time. Once he's across, he secures the rope so the other 3 climbers can basically just use it as a handrail and slide across. They all make it.
They must have been thrilled.
They were ecstatic. They had essentially unlocked the gate to the upper sections of the Eiger.
But then, and this is where it all goes wrong, they make a mistake.
A critical, monumental error. A mistake that, in hindsight, completely sealed their fate. After the last man got across the traverse, they pulled the rope out behind them.
Why? I mean, why would you remove your only bridge?
Logic. Or at least what seemed like perfectly sound logic to them at the time.
Because they were going up.
Right. They thought they were going straight to the summit. They had zero plans of coming back down the way they came. Leaving a heavy rope behind means losing gear that you might desperately need higher up on the mountain.
So they were fully committed to the up.
Completely committed. They didn't account for needing a down. By pulling that rope, they essentially threw away the key and locked the door behind them. They cut off their own retreat.
Okay, so they're committed. They climb higher. What goes wrong next?
The Eiger just starts to grind them down. First, Eiger gets injured. It seems he was struck in the head or shoulder by a falling stone from the spider area.
So he's struggling.
He's moving very slowly, he's in pain, and the team realizes pretty quickly that they cannot possibly make the summit with an injured man.
It's just too far.
Right. So to their credit, they make the honorable decision. They decide to swallow their pride and retreat to save their friend.
But by now the trap is springing. The weather has turned.
And when the weather turns on the Eiger, it's not just a bit of wind and rain. The entire mountain physically transforms. The water that was running down the rocks suddenly freezes solid. The rocks become completely glazed with verglass.
Define verglass for us, because that comes up a lot.
Verglass is a thin, transparent coating of ice over bare rock. It looks exactly like wet rock, but it is as slippery as a wet skating rink.
It's invisible ice.
Essentially, yes. You can't grip it with your fingers or gloves. You can't stand on it with your boots. It turns a climbable vertical rock face into a completely frictionless slide.
So they are fighting their way back down through this nightmare, and they finally reach the Hinterstoiser Traverse again.
But now the rock isn't just smooth, it's icy. And more importantly, they don't have that fixed rope.
The rope they pulled.
The rope they pulled. And they can't cross the gap. Physics is simply against them.
Because you need the rope to pendulum.
Exactly. You can pendulum across if you have a rope anchored above you to lean on, but you cannot climb sideways across a vertical icy mirror without that outward tension.
They must have realized immediately how much trouble they were in.
They did. They tried anyway. Hinterstoiser being the strongest of the 4, he tries for hours. He literally throws his body at the rock. He falls off, catching himself on the rope. He climbs back up. He tries a different angle. He tries again and again. But without that fixed rope, it is physically impossible to reverse the move.
They are completely trapped.
The door they locked behind them is now the wall they're going to die against.
That is just heart-wrenching. So what's their only option?
They are exhausted, freezing. They realize the only way off is to go straight down. A blind vertical rappel straight down the overhanging face, hoping they can somehow reach the railway tunnel windows thousands of feet below.
But as they're setting up the ropes to do this,
the avalanche hits them.
This part of the source material is just pure chaos. It all happens so incredibly fast.
It's brutal. A massive slide of heavy, wet snow and rock sweeps down the funnel and hits them head on.
And it just wipes the team out.
Almost instantly. It knocks Hinterstoiser completely off the wall. He was unclipped at that exact moment preparing the next rope, and he falls thousands of feet to his death.
God.
It slams Edie Rayner against the rock wall so violently that he dies almost instantly frozen upright against his pisoton. And Eiger, the injured one, who was tied lower down, he falls and the rope wraps around his neck and strangles him.
Which leaves Tony Kurtz.
Tony Kurtz is left completely alone, uninjured miraculously, but he is hanging on the climbing rope, suspended entirely in the air in the middle of a blizzard. Floating in the abyss. He has a dead man above him, Rayner. And a dead man below him. Eiger.
The psychological horror of that is just, it's unimaginable. He's hanging in the void with his dead friends, but he's still alive. And he starts screaming for help.
And the craziest part is he is heard.
Because of the train tunnel?
Right. The Jungfrau Railway actually runs inside the rock of the Eiger itself. And there's a gallery window, an opening carved out of the rock face at kilometer 3.8. The railway track guards hear his voice screaming over the howling wind.
So they know exactly where he is.
Yes. Guides are immediately summoned from the valley. Real professional Swiss rescue guides. They come up the train track, they open the wooden door in the cliff face, and they step out onto the wall to try and save him.
But they can't reach him.
They just can't. The weather is too severe, the storm is raging, and the rocks above the window are completely glazed in verglass.
So close, but so far.
They can climb up enough to get within shouting distance, maybe 100 feet or so below him, but the cliff overhangs too much. They simply cannot climb up the icy rock to physically reach him.
So we have this agonizing standoff. Tony Kurtz is hanging there. The guides are stuck below him. And night falls. He has to survive an entire night suspended on that rope.
He hangs there in a full blizzard. Sometime during the night, one of his wool gloves blows away in the wind.
Oh, no.
His bare hand creases completely solid. It turns into a useless frozen claw. He is severely dehydrated. He is terrified. He is battered by the wind, and he is surrounded by corpses.
But he makes it to morning.
He does. The next morning, the storm breaks slightly, and the guides come back out of the tunnel. They shout up to him. And they have to give him the worst possible news.
What do they tell him?
They yell up, "Tony Beauregard, you have to help yourself. We cannot come up to you."
I can't even fathom hearing those words in that situation. What are his instructions? What does he have to do?
The instructions are incredibly gruesome. First, they tell him he has to pull himself up slightly and cut away the dead body of his friend Eiger, who is hanging below him.
Because the weight is too much on the rope.
Exactly, to lighten the load and free up the rope. Imagine that. Having to saw through a rope and watch your friend's body just fall away into the void.
The trauma of just that one act.
But that's only step one. Then he has to physically climb up his own rope with a frozen hand to reach the dead body of Rainer above him. He has to cut the rope up there to free it from the anchor.
Okay, so now he has a length of loose rope. But it's not long enough to reach the guides.
Right. It's too short. So the guides tell him he has to unravel the rope.
Wait, untwist it.
Yes. Remember, this is the 1930s. This is old school thick hemp rope. It's made of 3 thick strands twisted together. He has to untwist the entire length of the rope to make 3 much thinner, weaker cords, then tie those 3 thin cords together, end to end, to make 1 super long string.
And he has to do all this with one frozen hand.
1 frozen hand and his teeth.
His teeth.
He uses his teeth to hold the strands while he twists with his good hand. He does this for 5 straight hours.
5 hours hanging in a harness in a freezing storm doing busy work with your teeth just to maybe survive.
The sheer willpower is superhuman. It really is. And amazingly, he manages to do it. He finishes the thin line and he lowers it down through the air to the guides.
Okay, so the guides get the thin line. What do they do?
The guides tie a brand new heavy rescue rope to the bottom of his thin line, along with some pitons and a hammer. Tony uses his good hand to pull this heavy rope all the way back up to him.
It must have weighed a ton.
It was exhausting. But he gets it. It finally looks like he's going to make it. The nightmare is almost over. He secures the new rope to the cliff. He sets up a rappel through a carabiner on his harness, and he starts slowly lowering himself down toward the guides.
He's actually coming down.
He's coming down inch by painful inch. He gets so close that the head guide can actually almost touch the iron spikes on Tony's boots with his ice axe.
They were right there.
Just feet away, and then he stops.
Why? What happened?
The knot. The guides down below, when they were preparing the rescue rope, they didn't have a single rope long enough to reach him, so they had to tie 2 long ropes together to make it reach.
Okay.
That knot connecting the 2 ropes is thick. It's bulky, and as Tony is sliding down the rope, that thick knot hits the metal carabiner at Tony's waist.
Oh, no. It won't feed through.
It's a geometry problem.
Yeah.
The knot is simply too fat to pass through the metal ring he is using to slide down.
But he's right there. Can't the guys just grab him?
He is dangling out from the overhang. He is literally suspended in the air. The guides are reaching out, leaning over the void, but they're just a few feet short of grabbing his legs.
So Tony has to force the knot through.
He tries. He struggles desperately. He tries to push it through with his one good hand. He shakes the rope, he bites at it. But he has spent every single ounce of his energy over the last 5 hours unraveling that hemp cord. His body is completely empty.
He has nothing left.
The guides are screaming up at him, "Tony, push! Try again, just one more push." But the knot is jammed tight. He is trapped literally inches from the outstretched hands of his rescuers.
And that's it.
That's it. He struggles for a few more minutes. Then you can just see his body give up. He slumps in his harness. He looks down at the guides, And he speaks very clearly over the wind.
What does he say?
He says, Ich kann nicht mehr.
Which means?
I'm finished, or I can do no more. He slowly tips forward in his harness, and he dies. Right there.
I can do no more. That story, I mean, it really completely explains why the mountain has the dark reputation it does. It's not just the death toll, it's the agonizing proximity to safety.
It is. It's the psychological torture.
Yeah.
And obviously, the public reaction to this specific tragedy was extremely polarized. The press across Europe went crazy. They called the climbers idiots, gladiators, suicidal maniacs. They demanded to know what the point of it all was.
Did the climbing community see it that way?
Not at all. And Harrer really emphasizes this in his book. To the climbers, Tony Kurz instantly became a symbol of heroic endurance.
Because he didn't quit.
Right. There's a line in the source material where Harrer actually quotes Kurz's own previous writings, where Kurz spoke of the sacred obligation never to give one's life away. He fought to the absolute last second of his consciousness.
So to a climber that isn't suicide, that's the ultimate affirmation of life, fighting for every breath.
Exactly.
Wow. So that is the massive heavy shadow hanging over the mountain, the archives of fear, the ghosts that Simpson talked about. Now let's fast forward 2 years, 1938.
Yes. The turning point.
The mountain is still unclimbed. The reputation of the murder wall is at its absolute peak. And enter Heinrich Harrer.
1938 is when the narrative really shifts. And the dynamic of this climb is fascinating because you actually have two completely different teams on the wall that eventually merge into one.
It goes from being a pure horror survival story to something almost like a heist movie or a tactical military thriller.
It really does. So you have the Austrian team, which is Heinrich Harrer and his partner Fritz Kasperek. And then you have the German team, André Heckmer and Ludwig Werg.
And at the start, they are not friends. They are rivals.
Fierce rivals. They are both gunning to be the first to conquer the face. They are basically racing each other up the lower sections. But there is a massive crucial difference in their equipment, which Harrer points out is arguably the deciding factor in the whole climb.
We need to talk about their feet.
Yes, we need to talk about crampons.
Which are the metal spikes you strap to your boots for ice climbing.
Exactly.
Right.
Now, the Austrians, Harrer and Kasperek, they were using the standard traditional 10-point crampons. These are 10 spikes pointing straight down from the sole of the boot. Great for walking flat on a glacier.
But they didn't have front points.
Right. No spikes sticking out the front of the toe.
So how do you actually climb steep vertical ice if your toes don't have spikes?
It's awful. You either have to violently twist your ankle totally sideways to get the bottom spikes to bite into the ice, which is agonizing on your joints if you do it for hours.
That sounds terrible.
Or the leader has to stop, take their ice axe, and literally carve steps into the ice. Chop, chop, step.
Chop, chop, step.
Like carving a staircase out of a frozen waterfall.
It is incredibly slow, exhausting work. It burns massive amounts of energy.
But the Germans had different gear.
The Germans, Heckmer and Werg, had the secret weapon. They were wearing the brand new 12-point crampons.
The game changer.
Total game changer. In addition to the 10 bottom spikes, they had 2 heavy spikes sticking straight out horizontally from the toe, like a vampire's fangs on the front of your boots, which allowed them to use a new technique, right? Front pointing.
Exactly. Instead of chopping steps, they could face the ice straight on and just kick the wall.
So they just kick the wall and stand on the toe spikes.
You kick the front spikes, bite deep into the hard ice, and you just step up. No cutting steps required.
Yeah.
It turned ice climbing from a massive construction project into a fast, fluid movement.
It must have been so much faster.
It was 4 times faster and used half the energy. The Germans literally catch up to the Austrians high on the wall, like a sports car just blowing past a dump truck.
But instead of just waving and blowing past them to claim all the glory for Germany, something really interesting happens. The weather starts to look really bad.
Classic Eiger weather threatening again.
Right. They're extremely high on the face. And they make a decision to merge the teams.
They form the rope of 4. This is the absolute pivotal moment of the 1938 ascent. They look at the sky, they look at the mountain, and they realize that their petty rivalry is going to get them all killed.
Because they need each other's strengths.
Right. The Germans have the speed and the 12-point gear to lead the ice sections. The Austrians have incredible local knowledge and superior rock climbing skills, so they physically tie their ropes together.
Harrer writes about this transition beautifully. He talks about the moment where I becomes we.
It ceases to be about, I want to win, and becomes, we want to live, and we want to get to the top of this thing together. It's a profound psychological shift.
So take us through the actual climb once they unite. They pass the death bivouac where Sittelmeyer and Meringer died. Then they reach the Hinterskoiser Traverse.
And this is such a haunting, incredibly poetic moment. They get to the blank wall, and hanging there, frozen to the rock, is the old frayed rope left by the dead climbers from 1936.
The rope Hinterstoicer pulled. Well, the rope he used earlier.
The remnants of their passage, yes. The team actually uses that old weathered rope to help them cross the traverse. It's a literal physical link to the tragedy of the past, helping them succeed in the present.
The ghost of Hinterstoicer actually helps them survive. That gives me chills.
It's amazing. Then they push higher, and they hit a feature called the ice hose.
Which sounds lovely.
It's a brutal vertical chimney of rock that acts as a drain for melting ice above. Harrer describes climbing straight up through a literal waterfall of freezing water.
So they're completely soaked.
The water is pouring into their sleeves, down their necks, inside their clothes. They are soaked to the bone in sub-zero temperatures.
But they keep moving.
Because Heckmeyer is in the lead with those 12-point crampons, they can move fast enough to generate body heat and avoid freezing to death.
And then finally they reach the spider, the funnel we talked about earlier.
They reach the spider, and of course a massive storm hits right as they get there, the classic Eiger tempest. And here we get one of the most intense, visceral descriptions in the entire book.
This is the moment Harrer describes as a crushing, sliding hell.
Yes, they are out on the exposed 45-degree ice field. A massive avalanche releases from the summit funnel and sweeps directly over them.
Are they anchored?
Barely. Harrer is pinned face first against the steep ice by the sheer weight of the snow pouring over him. The avalanche is literally trying to rip his body off the mountain. He's holding onto his ice axe with everything he has, wondering if the pittance will hold, wondering if his partner Kasperek has already been swept away into the void.
And he shares his internal monologue during this, which I found totally surprising and fascinating.
It's brilliant. He says he didn't have his whole life flash before his eyes. He wasn't having profound spiritual thoughts about God or the universe or his loved ones.
What was he thinking about while he was actively being crushed by an avalanche?
He was annoyed.
Annoyed.
He was incredibly angry. He kept thinking about the journalists and the critics down in the valley at the hotel bars. He was furious at the thought that if they died right there, the press would just be so smug about it.
Oh, look, another 4 dead idiots.
Exactly. He refused to let go of the ice purely out of sheer spite for the media.
That is the most human reaction ever.
Yeah.
I can't die here. Those guys in the hotel will be so annoying about it.
Spite is a powerful motivator. But eventually, the avalanche tapers off. The flow of snow stops. And they look around and realize something incredible.
They're all still there.
No one fell. The rope held. The pitons held. Harrer calls it the Eiger miracle. It was this profound, humbling realization that they were just allowed to live by the mountain.
So they survive the spider. They push up through the final overhanging ice-choked gullies known as the exit cracks.
Yeah.
And finally, on July 24th, 1938, they crawl onto the summit.
And the description of the summit moment is fascinating because it's completely anticlimactic.
There's no big celebration.
No cheering, no flag waving, no jumping up and down hugging. Harrer describes a very dull, overwhelming sense of release. He says they just felt the privilege of having been allowed to live.
It wasn't about triumph, it was just about survival. They were just too emotionally and physically bankrupt to feel like heroes.
Exactly.
Now we really have to address the elephant in the room regarding this 1938 ascent. This was a highly charged political time.
Very much so.
The Nazis were fully in power in Germany. The Anschluss had just happened, which was the annexation of Austria into the German Reich. So there was a massive amount of propaganda surrounding this climb.
You really cannot tell the historical story without acknowledging the shadow of the swastika in the background. The Nazi regime desperately wanted to claim the first ascent of the Eiger North Face as a symbol of pure Aryan superiority and courage.
And a combined German-Austrian team succeeding right after the annexation was perfect for them.
It was absolute propaganda gold for Goebbels. When these 4 men succeeded, they were feted as massive national heroes. Hitler personally met with them and gave them medals. Their faces were everywhere.
Does Harrer address this political hijacking in the book?
He does, and he is very firm about his stance in the source material. He insists repeatedly that up on the wall there was absolutely no politics.
Because the mountain doesn't care.
Right. His argument is that the Eiger doesn't care if you are a Nazi, a communist, a capitalist, or a pacifist. Ice is just ice. Gravity is just gravity. He argues that their motivation for climbing was purely personal. It was the irresistible challenge of the frontier.
He actively debunks the myth that they climbed for the glory of the Reich.
He explicitly denies it. He says they were just young climbers doing what they love, trying to push the limits of human capability. Now, whether modern historians accept that totally at face value or view it as some post-war sanitization of his own record, that's a debate outside the scope of the text. But in the book itself, he focuses entirely on the pure, apolitical brotherhood of the rope.
It's a critical distinction to make. The propaganda machine undeniably used their achievement, but their own internal motivation, according to Harrer, was just the purity of the climb. And that specific theme of brotherhood on the rope actually evolves significantly in the later chapters of the book.
It becomes a major philosophical pillar of the Eiger's history.
Because after World War II, obviously Europe is completely devastated. There was a massive amount of bitterness and trauma between nations. But the Eiger strangely becomes this place where that starts to heal.
It does. And this introduces the concept of the European rope. We jump ahead to 1952, which is a very pivotal climb.
Okay, set this one up for us.
You have a French team and a combined Austrian-German team on the north face at the exact same time.
And remember, for context, just a few years prior to this, these men's nations were locked in a total, brutal war. These specific guys easily could have been shooting at each other in a trench somewhere.
Exactly. The historical animosity is fresh. The key figures here are Hermann Buhl, who is this legendary hard-as-nails Austrian climber, and Gaston Rouffat, a highly elegant, very famous French mountain guide.
And they meet high up on the wall.
They run into each other on the face. And once again, the Eiger weather is absolutely terrible. Freezing, hail, electrical storms, the works. Now, they could have competed. They could have tried to race each other or just completely ignored each other and stayed in their national groups.
But instead, they tie their ropes together.
They physically link up. The European rope. Men from nations that had just been slaughtering each other are now literally trusting each other with their very lives on an icy cliff.
It was a journalist named Guido Tonella who coined that specific term, right?
Yes, Tonella wrote about it and called it the rope of a united Europe. There's a quote in the book from Rouffat about this moment that is just so perfectly honest. He admits that the situation was miserable. He says the human animal in me was unhappy.
Meaning his ego. He wanted the glory for himself and for France.
Right. The ambitious human animal didn't want to share the route or the glory. He wanted to be the lone hero. But he follows that up by affirming that the spirit of brotherhood ultimately prevailed.
The shared suffering forced them together.
The immense shared suffering on the mountain effectively erased the arbitrary national borders. They realized very quickly that their shared enemy, which was gravity and death, was vastly bigger and more important than their recent national enemies.
It seems like the Eiger operates as this giant abrasive wheel that just strips away all the artificial stuff, politics, nationality, human ego. It all just freezes off up there, and you are left with nothing but human beings trying desperately not to fall.
That is precisely the lesson of the mountain, according to Harrer.
Yeah.
It violently exposes your true character, and it absolutely forces cooperation if you want to survive.
But unfortunately, the mountain certainly didn't stop killing people after they figured out how to cooperate. We have to talk about the 1957 tragedy, because it highlights another major evolution in the story of the Eiger, the evolution of rescue.
The story of Claudio Corti and Stefano Longhi.
Right. This was referred to as a massive tragedy of errors.
It was. You had an Italian party, Corti and Longhi, and a separate German party who also got onto the face. They all got into terrible trouble. They got lost. They got injured. The weather turned. It turned into this agonizing, drawn-out catastrophe.
But the response from the climbing community was totally different this time. It turned into this massive international rescue operation.
And this is where we see the stark contrast to the Tony Kerse disaster. Back in 1936, the guides at the window were fundamentally helpless. They didn't have the technology to reach him.
But in '57, they basically changed the rules of the game.
They industrialized the rescue. Teams of climbers from several different countries climbed to the summit of the mountain, the top, and they hauled a massive, heavy steel cable drum all the way up there.
A steel winch.
A winch. And they literally lowered a rescuer, a guy named Alfred Hellepart, down the sheer vertical north face on a thin steel cable.
Like a spider descending on a metal thread.
Exactly like that. Hellepart descended hundreds of feet into the Atlas, swinging around. He managed to land on the tiny ledge where Claudio Corti was stranded.
And he actually pulled him off.
He strapped Corti onto his own back, and they were hand-winched all the way back up to the summit by the team above. It was an astonishing technological triumph. It essentially proved that the murder wall wasn't totally inaccessible to rescuers anymore.
But the tragedy of it is that they couldn't save everyone.
No, they couldn't. Cordy's partner, Stefano Longhi, was left behind. He was injured and stranded on a completely different lower ledge. The steel cable simply couldn't reach him.
Oh, man.
The weather closed in hard. They had to abandon the effort. Longhi died of exposure and exhaustion alone on the wall. And the most macabre part, for 2 full years, his body remained there, hanging in his bright red harness.
Visible from the valley.
Visible through the telescopes at the hotels, just swaying in the wind for 2 years. Another permanent ghost added to the collection. It was a very grim reminder that even with all their steel cables and winches, the mountain still holds the ultimate trump card.
It's just horrifying. But this technological shift really ushers us into the modern era of the Eiger's history. The later chapters of the book touch on how the entire philosophy of climbing the face changed.
The barrier was broken.
Right. We went from, this is completely impossible, to let's climb it in the dead of winter, to let's see how incredibly fast we can run up this thing.
The era of the direttissima.
Which means the direct route. Right.
Yes. Instead of weaving around trying to find the easiest path connecting ledges and ice fields, the new generation wanted to draw a perfectly straight vertical line from the bottom directly to the summit.
Which is much harder and more dangerous.
Much harder. And then came the obsession with speed records. Climbers like the Swiss guide Hilti von Allmen started literally racing up the original 1938 route.
To put it in perspective, what took Harrer, and the others 3 agonizing days of near-death experiences von Allmen was doing in 10 hours?
And then others did it in 5 hours. Just to update the listener today, guys like Ueli Steck have free soloed the route, meaning with no ropes at all, in under 2.5 hours.
2.5 hours. It's like the 4-minute mile in track.
Yeah.
Once the psychological barrier is shattered, the human standard just completely shifts.
The impossible becomes a morning workout.
But despite the mind-boggling speed, despite the modern Gore-Tex gear and carbon fiber ice axes, Harrer and Joe Simpson always firmly circle back to the core philosophy.
Because the soul of the mountain hasn't changed.
Right. It's not really about the speed record. It always goes back to that royal irrationality.
That phrase is just so key to the whole book.
Let's really dig into that as we wrap this up. Is it madness? Why should someone listening today care about this incredibly dark story if the mountain has essentially been tamed by athletes in spandex running up it in 2 hours?
Because the fundamental internal experience hasn't changed. Harrer concludes his book by saying that climbing is not about defeating the mountain. He actually strongly dislikes the word conquest.
Too arrogant.
He says conquest is a deeply arrogant word. You don't conquer the Eiger any more than a surfer conquers the ocean. You survive it. You engage with it respectfully. He says the true purpose is about gaining self-knowledge at what he calls the frontier of things.
The frontier of things. That is a beautiful way to phrase it.
It means standing right on the razor edge of existence. And Joe Simpson picks up on this exact same thread in his introduction. He poses a question to the modern reader. Do you want to live long or do you want to live deep?
That's the crux of it, isn't it? We live in a modern society that completely optimizes for maximum longevity.
Right. We want to be safe.
We have health insurance, we have airbags in our cars, we have warning labels on hot coffee cups. The whole goal of modern life is to make it to 90 years old with as few scratches as possible.
But the climber actively seeks something else.
Intensity.
The climber wants intensity over duration. Simpson argues that the constant presence of death is what validates the climb. It makes it a lifestyle and a philosophy, not just a weekend sport. It's a game of ultimate risk, where what you stand to lose, your only life, massively outweighs what you could ever theoretically win.
Because there's no prize money.
There's no tangible reward. But the winning isn't a gold medal. The winning is the profound visceral experience of being truly, vibrantly, intensely alive, simply because you are so incredibly close to not being alive.
It reminds me of that basic idea that a simple meal tastes like a gourmet feast when you're genuinely starving. Life itself just feels vastly more vivid and real when you've almost lost it.
Exactly. And Harrer points out that the mountain ruthlessly strips away all the masks we wear. When you are standing on the white spider completely exposed and an avalanche is roaring down at you, you cannot fake who you are.
You can't talk your way out of it.
You can't hide behind your impressive job title or your bank account balance or your nationality. You are reduced to just a fragile biological human being facing the absolute supreme indifference of nature.
And in that terrifying moment, you find out exactly who you really are.
You do.
Yeah.
And just as importantly, you find out exactly who your friends are. The whole history of the European rope proves that.
Exactly. That profound cooperation
Mhm.
born purely out of mortal danger. It's a level of absolute trust that our safe, everyday civilization just rarely asks of us.
In the office, you collaborate on a spreadsheet. On the climbing rope, you literally hold another human's life in your frozen hands. That is a fundamentally, vastly different kind of human connection.
It really is. So here's the thought we want to leave you with today after all of this. We're absolutely not suggesting you go out and buy crampons.
Please do not go try to climb the Eiger North Face unless you are a world-class professional.
Seriously, stay on the sunny terrace with the cold beer.
It's much nicer down there.
But we want you to look at the deeper story here. Look closely at the European rope. Look at the immense, unquestioning trust required between rivals like Harrer and Heckmeyer or former enemies like Buell and Rebuffet.
Yeah.
In our incredibly comfortable, extremely safe, hyper-insured modern lives, have we somehow lost the ability to trust each other that deeply?
It's a valid question.
Is there a specific, sharp, profound value in voluntarily placing yourself in a situation where the outcome is entirely binary, total success or total death, that teaches us something vital about our humanity that we simply cannot learn in a place of safety?
Is that European rope, that intense life or death cooperation, something that our modern civilization fundamentally loses when it just becomes a little too comfortable? Do we secretly need a murder wall or at least some form of shared intense struggle to remind us how to truly deeply rely on one another?
It's definitely something heavy to mull over while you're sitting safe and sound on solid ground. And that is it for our deep dive today into the frozen history of the white spider.
Stay safe out there, everyone. But, maybe not too safe.
See you next time.